coming up with a great idea for a new movie is just the start of the process. You then need to follow through with a strong script that's filmed by a skilled director and talented cast. That is to say, making any movie that lives up to the potential of its premise, regardless of genre, is basically a miraculous confluence of talent and luck. All the same, it can be immensely frustrating when a film has so much promise in the bones of its idea, yet most of that promise ends up being tossed aside with a mediocre, even genuinely terrible execution. And that's sadly the case with these horror films, each of which had a killer idea at their core, yet for one of many reasons, they ended up wasting that concept. So with that in mind, I'm Ellie for What Culture, and here are 10 horror movies that squandered huge potential. Number 10, Brightburn. Brightburn has one of those banger horror movie concepts that every writer in Hollywood probably wishes they came up with. What if Superman was an evil kid? An R-rated dark Superman movie produced by James Gunn and written by his brothers Brian and Mark? The potential for this one speaks for itself, and yet Brightburn ultimately feels like a thin first draft of a much better movie. Psychological complexity and moral ambiguity are in short supply throughout, with the film largely using its R rating to coast on some brutal gore, all while protagonist Brandon remains a frustrating cipher all the way to the sequel-baiting conclusion. There are definitely some neat ideas within Brightburn, but it also goes the easy, predictable route far too often, and simply lacks the sophistication of movies penned by James Gunn himself. It would certainly be intriguing to see another filmmaker take a crack at the same concept sometime down the line, because it's just too damn good to toss away on one mediocre movie. Number 9, Antlers. Scott Cooper's Antlers is a close but no cigar horror movie. A Guillermo del Toro-produced creature feature based off an acclaimed short story with an atmospheric Oregon setting and top-draw cast led by Kerry Russell and Jesse Plemons. Though the Wendigo's creature design is excellent, Antlers is too often a low-energy family-centric drama which tones down the more disturbing nature of the source material. It's well shot and compellingly acted, for sure, but ultimately not terribly memorable, thanks to the boilerplate dialogue, thin characters, and overall lack of atmospheric flavour you'd surely expect from a horror film steeped in such fascinating mythology. At even just 99 minutes in length, this one's a bit of a snoozer that fails to deliver the expected intensity, instead struggling to reconcile its dramatic ambitions with the demands of its genre. There's so much talent here, both in front of and behind the camera, but it all adds up to a not bad, not great offering that had the potential to be a stone-cold genre masterpiece. Number 8, World War Z. There was much initial excitement when an adaptation of Max Brooks' beloved zombie novel World War Z was announced, and the potential of adapting the novel's various short stories into a cinematic undead anthology spoke for itself. But of course, that's not what Hollywood did. Instead, using the World War Z branding to tell a mostly original standalone story centered around a retired UN investigator, Jerry Lane, fighting to save his family and cure the zombie plague. It's often said that World War Z is a passable zombie movie, but a terrible adaptation of its beloved source material. But even that's arguably a pretty charitable account. Sure, it's surprising how watchable the end result is given the shoot's infamous production issues, but from its generic action thriller treatment to the sanitized PG-13 rating, this is a thoroughly toothless, blandly forgettable blockbuster. Despite grossing $540 million worldwide, this one's had little cultural staying power, and after years of attempts at developing a sequel, it was finally cancelled in 2019. World War Z was probably always better suited to the anthology TV series treatment anyway, and of all the films on this list, it's probably the ripest for a reboot in that regard. Number 7, Renfield. Renfield truly seemed like it was going to be a refreshingly unique take on the vampire movie, revolving around Dracula's abusive relationship with his long-suffering servant, Renfield. Using this classic relationship to satirize toxic workplaces was an extremely inspired idea, and let's be honest, did anyone really need to hear anything more than Nicolas Cage as Dracula to be sold on it? And to be fair, the Dracula-Renfield plot is actually pretty fun. The problem is that this is really only half of the movie, with the other half devoted to a dishwater-dull crime plot revolving around put-upon traffic cop Rebecca. It feels like a producer took two separate scripts and combined them into one ill-fitting whole for some reason. And the result is a film that does full justice to neither idea, while ensuring Nicolas Cage doesn't get nearly as much screen time as he should. The crumbs of a brilliant idea are there, though frequently undermined by a lack of full commitment. Number 6, Old. For all of his successes as a filmmaker, M. Night Shyamalan is well noted for being more adept at coming up with intriguing concepts than seeing through their execution, and his 2021 film Old is no exception. The body horror film rocks one hell of a premise, taking place on a secluded beach whose visitors suddenly find themselves rapidly aging. Like many of Shyamalan's films, it sounds like the perfect setup for a Twilight Zone-esque horror romp. But as ever, it's the follow-through that really matters, and that's where Old quickly comes unstuck. After a compelling setup, Old gets bogged down in a quagmire of stiff, distractingly unnatural dialogue, which the talented ensemble cast struggles to chew through. Most of the characters are thin sketches, and there's little in the way of consistent logic or rules to the central scenario, ahead of an underwhelming plot twist and drawn-out finale. You can basically flip a coin on whether Shyamalan will deliver the goods or not, and sadly, in the case of Old, he came up desperately short. Number 5. Halloween 5: The Revenge of Michael Myers. Halloween 4: The Return of Michael Myers ended with one hell of an enticing tease for the 5th film, as it's implied that Michael Myers' niece Jamie Lloyd has inherited his murderous tendencies when she apparently stabs her foster mother Darlene to death. But Halloween 5: The Revenge of Michael Myers swiftly unpicks that ending, revealing that Darlene survived the attack and not having Jamie follow in Michael's footsteps. Rather, her trauma renders her mute and she develops a psychic link with Michael instead. Though Danielle Harris gives a strong performance as Jamie, and the iconic laundry chute scene is the easy highlight, for the most part Halloween 5 is a rather cowardly backpedal following the previous film's provocative ending. While an early draft of Halloween 5's script did indeed feature a killer Jamie, this was ultimately vetoed by an executive producer. Instead, Halloween 5 marked the point at which the series descended into outright farce, effectively dooming it until it went back to basics with 2018's direct sequel to the 1978 original. Number 4. Winchester. Haunted house movies are a dime a dozen, but Winchester had quite the unique hook, given that it takes place within the very real Winchester Mystery House, an architecturally peculiar mansion which was the home of weapons heiress Sarah Winchester. The house's maze-like design is perfect for a horror movie, and the fact that Winchester ends up being haunted by the victims of the Winchester rifles her family's empire was built on is just the icing on the cake. Yet despite having all this and Helen Mirren going for it, Winchester is a deathly dull, airless affair bogged down by endless reams of expository dialogue, tired jump scares you'll see coming a mile away, and an uncommonly naff American accent from the usually reliable Mirren. On top of that, the likes of Sarah Snook and Jason Clarke are given very little to do. For everything working in its favour on paper, it's maddening just how utterly forgettable Winchester actually is. Number 3. Army of the Dead. For all the flack he gets, credit where it's due to Zack Snyder. The premise for Army of the Dead was an absolute home run. A heist movie set in a zombie-infested Las Vegas? Sounds great! Yet Army of the Dead was ultimately more exhausting than entertaining, with its grueling 148-minute runtime resulting in a canvas overstuffed with half-baked subplots and characters. Beyond that, Snyder's stylistic choices were arguably more of an encumbrance than a benefit. The excess of slow motion quickly became tiresome, and his decision to shoot the film wide open with an ultra-shallow depth of field was more distracting than artistic. There was probably a decent 100-minute movie trapped in here somewhere, but Army of the Dead is ultimately a garish mess of confidently incorrect choices, enough that it doesn't fully satisfy as either a zombie movie or a heist romp, let alone a bold collision of the two. Number 2. The Forest. A brilliant setting can elevate even a mediocre horror film, and 2016's The Forest certainly had an immediately attention-grabbing locale. The movie takes place primarily in Aokigahara, aka Japan's suicide forest, which is known for its high rate of suicides and follows a woman who heads into the forest to search for her missing twin sister. The innate eeriness of the forest and its history immediately lend the film an ominous atmosphere, yet the bulk of The Forest is otherwise a totally generic supernatural horror film that does little memorable with its fantastic location. The order of the day here is garden variety jump scares ahead of a twist you'll likely see coming a mile away. The setting and Natalie Dormer's solid dual performance keeps this out of abject train wreck territory, but given the potential, it falls way short of the mark. It would certainly be great to see a Japanese filmmaker offer a more inspired take on the same core idea. Number 1. The Last Voyage of the Demeter. The Last Voyage of the Demeter was a feature-length adaptation of a single chapter from Bram Stoker's Dracula novel, where Dracula takes the merchant ship Demeter from Transylvania to London, picking off the ship's crew throughout the journey. While it might seem like a stretch to adapt a single section of the novel into its own movie, this actually made a ton of sense. Turning Dracula's journey into a gothic slasher film on board a boat as the vampire stalks the imperiled crew was rife with potential. But despite some atmospheric visuals, decent performances, and an appreciably feral vampiric design, The Last Voyage of the Demeter suffers from slack pacing throughout its 2-hour runtime, as well as thin characters and a disappointing lack of suspense. Simply, the script struggles to expand this chapter of Stoker's story out to feature length, nor make the most of its ultra-claustrophobic setting. It's certainly not terrible, but it is a massive letdown relative to its clear promise.